Hello and welcome to another C# coding homework exercise. In this one we are going to create a Motorway class that can be used as an extra documentation with directions. We are to include data members such as name of the motorway, like type in like road, street, avenue and so forth, direction, east, west, north or south, surface like a blacktop, gravel, sand or whatever, and a number of lanes, tall or not tall, and the party that maintains it. We are to write instance methods that return the full name of the motorway and whether it is tall or not, and also full name of the motorway and the number of lanes. And also we are to include a ToString method that returns all the data members with appropriate labels. And of course, since we have three different ways to construct the object as they want us to, with full name with motorway and tall, and full name and lanes, we need to include enough constructors to make that happen. Alright, this is fairly simple object-oriented programming type of exercise, so let's get started. I'm going to create a class and I'm going to call it Motorway. And in the class I'm simply going to create a bunch of properties and the constructors as requested. So the first one is going to be a public property of string. I'll call it name, and it's going to be just automatic get and set. The next one, it's going to be a string, string like that, and I'll call it Motorway type. The next one, it's going to be directions, so it's gonna be south, east, west or north. So we'll just collect a character, S for south, N for north and so forth. So this is going to be a character and it's going to be called directions. And the next one is going to be the surface, so it's just a string called surface. And the next one is going to be number of lanes, so it's going to be an integer and it's going to be called number of lanes. Then we're supposed to know whether it's tall or not tall road. So this is going to be a boolean, simply returns true if it is a tall motorway and false if it is not. And I'll call it tall. And finally we have the maintenance, so that's just a string. So these are our properties, and now we need three constructors because we're supposed to create the objects in three different ways. So the first one, they just want the input to be the name of the road and nothing else. So we'll do a public constructor and it expects string name. That's going to be the name of the motorway, and we'll simply assign a property to the parameter that is being passed into the constructor. The next one takes the name and also whether it is or not a tall road. So we'll do another public constructor, but this one will also take the name but also a boolean whether it is a tall or road or not. So in this one we will initialize the name to name, and we will initialize the tall to the argument tall. And the last one takes the name and the number of lanes. So we'll do a public, and this one takes the name, so string name and integer number of lanes. And just like before, we'll initialize the name property to the name argument, and we will initialize the number of lanes, not the property number of lanes, to the argument num of lanes. Alright, so these are our constructors, and we also need a ToString method that returns everything. So we will do a ToString method, so it's going to be public override, and the IntelliSense already gives me ToString method, and we will simply return a combination string or a concatenated string with all the members and properties. So we will do an string, let's say motorway name, that's gonna be the first one, and we will pass the name property into it. And on the new line we will do the rest. So we will do the motorway, and this is going to be the type, and we will pass the property motorway type, and again new line, and the next one is going to be, which one's direction, so we will pass the direction, new line, so the next one is going to be the surface. We'll pass the surface property, and we have number of lanes, so it's gonna be the next one, and it's going to be the property number of lanes, and I'm sure you already got the gist of this, so it's gonna be the next one, tall, and we will pass the tall, and finally we have the maintenance, so we will pass the maintenance property. Alright, so this is our ToString method, and in order to utilize this we can create another constructor that has all of these arguments being passed to it. So just like we created the other constructors before, this one will have everything in it. So I'll make it the first one, because this one's gonna be the complete one. So it's gonna be public motorway, and this one will take the name type, so it's gonna be string name, string type, that's gonna be char direction, string surface, integer num of lanes, and boolean tall, and finally string maintenance. And in this one we will initialize all the properties, so our name equals name, our motorway type equals type, our direction equals direction, and what's next, surface, so surface equals surface, number of lanes equals number of lanes, tall equals tall, and finally we have our maintenance. So this will be our complete constructor with everything supplied, and then we have 3 other constructors that only have some of the properties supplied, or arguments that we will initialize in our properties. Alright, so let's test it. Let's see if we can create some objects and run it. So let's create a few motorways. So I'll create motorway 1, and it will be new motorway, and we will pass everything in it. So it's gonna be motorway 1 will be the name, the type, I don't know, can be highway, direction, let's make it south, it's a character. The next one is the surface, so let's do I don't know, asphalt. The next one is the number of lanes, so let's make it 3 lane. And toll, let's make it not toll road, so it's gonna be false. And maintenance, I don't know, let's just name it maintenance company, will be the name of the maintenance company. So this is our first motorway, and we can display it. So let's do console.writeLine, and in this one, since we have everything, we can simply display motorway 1, which we call the ToString method, and a new line. And I'm going to borrow this because we are going to create another, and this one will be motorway 2, and this one will only have the name, and it asks for whether it is toll or not, toll road or not. So let's make it true. Let's make it a toll road, and that's all. It will just take 2 arguments and initialize or instantiate the motorway with the constructor that asks only for the name and the boolean whether it is toll road or not. And there's one more. This one only takes a name, so let's make it motorway 3. So I'll name it motorway 3, and that's the only argument that we will pass. So, and again, we will call the ToString method. And was there another? So we have the name, and we have the name and number of lanes. So before that, let's after that, let's make motorway 4. So we will take the name and the number of lanes. So let's make it 2 lanes. So we created 4 different motorways, all calling ToString method, but being instantiated from different constructors. So let's run it and see what we get. So here it is. The first one is motorway 1. The type is highway, direction is south, it's asphalt, 3 lanes false, and maintenance company. So this is the one that we supplied everything. The next one we only supplied the whether it is toll and the name of the road. So it's motorway, I have it as motorway 1, but it should be actually motorway 2. And toll, it says true. Well, we don't really want to say it true, we want to say it yes or no, so we'll take care of that next. The next one is just the name, which is motorway 3, and everything else. Actually the toll is there as well. How come we didn't instantiate the toll? See, we only have motorway 3, just the name, but not toll. Another thing we'll have to take care of. And finally we have motorway 4, which has the number of lanes and the name, but again it has the toll as well. So the reason why there is a toll false for the ones, even though we didn't instantiate it or didn't pass it as an argument, is because our toll is a boolean, and boolean by default is false. So if you don't supply it, it simply says false. So in order to make it something else other than true or false, we're going to make it nullable. So after the boolean in our property, I'll put a question mark. That will make it nullable, meaning that it may not be initialized to false by default. It simply will be null. It won't be true, it won't be false, it will be null, like nothing, kind of. So now, if I run it now, the ones that I didn't initialize the toll to anything, you can see is blank now. Now, we can do the same with number of lanes, because we have number of lanes as 0, but we don't want it because that's the initial value. If you don't supply it, the program simply initializes the integer to 0. So we can do make the number of lanes nullable as well. So the integer question mark. So again, if I run it, Now if we didn't supply the number of lanes, it is blank. If we did supply it, it simply places the value that we supplied in the number of lanes as an integer. Now one thing we can do to make this better, like direction is S because it's a character. We supply S for south and for north, but we want to really spell it out as south or north. And the same with tolls. We don't want to say false or true. We want to say yes or no. So what I'm going to do in our class up here, I'm going to create some enums. The first one will be enum, I'll call it is tall, and it will have values of yes and no. And since this is a nullable, we can now also have something like not applicable. So I will do NA as not applicable. I have the brackets wrong. So this is our first enum is tall. And I'm going to create another enum. And this is going to be for the directions. So public enum, I'll call it directions. And it will be north, east, south, and west. And since this is also just like tall, doesn't have to be supplied. Like if we can just supply the name, or we can just supply the name and the number of lanes. So then we want to have another option which it says not applicable. In other words, it wasn't supplied. And now we can use these in our properties. So instead of having our tall displayed in our ToString method, we will make a function or a method that will simply display yes, no, or not applicable. So I'm going to create a method that will return our enum, which is called isTall, and I'll call it is Motorway tall. So in other words, is it a toll road or not? And in it, we'll simply do a switch statement, switch, and we will do we will take our tall property, which is true or false, and based on that we will display yes or no. So if our tall is true, so if the case is true, then we will return our enum is tall yes, and it will simply display yes. If the case is false, then we will of course return our enum, so is tall no. And if it's not supplied, it's, in other words, it's the default, then we will simply return is tall not applicable. And we do something similar with the directions. I'll create a method. It can be a private because it's not going to be used outside of this class. It will return the enum directions, and I'll call get directions. And in this method, just like we did before with the switch statement, we will use another switch statement, and this time we will take the directions, which is a character that is supplied in the as an argument in the constructor, and it is stored in our directions direction property. So if the character supplied is n for north, then we will return directions north. If the case is east, we will return directions east. If the I got a little ahead of myself. If the case is south or s, then we will return directions south, and we will return west for W. So return directions west. And default will be, if the directions is not supplied, we will simply return the directions not applicable. So now, in order to actually print these or display in our console, instead of the properties over here, we will call the methods. We will call the isMotorway_tall and getDirections method. So when it says directions, instead of directions, I will call the getDirections, and tall, instead of the property tall, I will call isMotorway_tall. So if I run it now, the first one, everything was supplied, so everything is displayed. But now tall is no, because we set it as false at the first for the Motorway 1, and it is yes in Motorway 2, which I have to change the Motorway 1 to Motorway 2 for the name. And you can also see that the directions, if it was not supplied, it simply says not applicable. And we can do not applicable for everything, and we will do that next. Instead of just blank, like if the surface is not supplied or if the number of lanes is not supplied, we just want to display not applicable. So let's do that. But before, let me just change the name of the motorway to Motorway 2 on this line. We have Motorway 1, 2, 3, and 4. Alright, so how do we do it for not applicable if the properties are not initialized? Well, we can set a default value, especially for strings. So string, like motorway type, if it's not supplied in our property, we can simply say not applicable will be the default value. The same with the surface. The same with the maintenance. These are strings, so it's a simple string as a default value. Now, number of lanes cannot be not applicable. It won't work because it's an integer, and this is obviously a string. But we have it set up as nullable, so we can check if the number of lanes is null, and if it is, we will return a string not applicable. So we will create another method. Let me just create it here. And it's going to be a private method that returns a string, and I'll call it how many lanes. And in it, I will do a simple if statement. So if the number, that wasn't very helpful from the IntelliSense. If the number of lanes is null, in other words, if it was not supplied, we will return not applicable. Otherwise, in other words, if it was supplied, we will simply return a string version of the integer. So we will return the property number of lanes, but we will convert it to ToString. And here in number of lanes in our ToString method, instead of the property, we will call the how many lanes method. Alright, so let's run it again. So again, our first one has everything supplied, so everything is already instantiated with the object. Now the second one had only the tall and the name, so it's Motorway 2, and tall says yes. And everything else you can see is not applicable, including the number of lanes. Now the third one had the name only, and everything else you can see is not applicable. And lastly, the fourth one has the name and the number of lanes, so that is set, and everything else is not applicable. So this would be the best way to, I think, for this simple exercise to set the ToString method and the enumerations as well as the default values for the strings. Alright, so this is it. This is the solution. I hope you liked it, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.